The summer sun burned low over the wide plains of Montana, casting long shadows across the rolling hills. The golden grass swayed gently in the evening wind, whispering secrets to the open sky. Once this quiet land had echoed with thunder, not of storms but of hooves, gunfire, and the desperate cries of men locked in mortal struggle. The Battle of the Little Bighorn had ended here, and the earth, even now, still remembered. June 25th, 1876. The day the United States Army suffered one of its most shocking and humiliating defeats. The official story told Americans that Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong, Custer's Civil War hero, frontier golden boy, the very image of American courage, had died bravely, hopelessly outnumbered, fighting to the last man. Newspapers called it Custer's Last Stand. Artists painted him standing tall on a lonely ridge, flag in hand, defying fate. But the truth was far less noble and far more disturbing. What happened on those hills was not just a military disaster. It was a collapse of leadership, discipline, and honesty. And within days, it became something far darker, a deliberate cover-up. Custer commanded the famed 7th Cavalry, nearly 600 men, veterans of frontier warfare. His orders were simple: locate and engage a large native force led by Sitting Bull, a spiritual leader who refused to be driven from his people's ancestral lands into reservations. But Custer was not a man of patience. He was a man chasing redemption and glory. His career, once brilliant, had been tarnished by scandal, arrogance, and reckless ambition. This battle, he believed, would be his chance to rise again, to silence his critics and secure his legend. When his scouts returned with warnings that the native camp was enormous, thousands of warriors, not hundreds, Custer brushed them aside. "If we can whip them," he said, "we can whip anything." The words would haunt history. By noon on June 25th, Custer split his regiment into 3 detachments, a fatal decision. Major Marcus Reno advanced from the south. Captain Frederick Benteen was sent west with orders to scout and support. Custer himself rode north, intending to strike what he imagined was the enemy's rear. But in truth, he was riding straight into a trap. From the ridges ahead, Custer's men looked down upon a vast encampment, a living sea of teepees, fires, and smoke stretching for miles. It was no raiding party. It was an entire people, Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, gathered for their summer hunt and to celebrate their freedom. When Reno's attack began, chaos exploded. Warriors poured from the lodges, charging the soldiers with terrifying speed. Reno's line faltered, then broke. Men fled into the timber, firing wildly before racing back across the river under heavy fire. Horses drowned. Soldiers were cut down. Reno's command disintegrated in panic, scrambling up the bluffs to safety. Custer never knew. Riding east along the ridges, unaware his left flank had collapsed, he advanced until he too was surrounded. Warriors closed in from every direction, cutting off his escape. The gunfire, the shouts, and the beating of drums filled the air. Within less than an hour, Custer and all his men were dead. 2 days later, General Alfred Terry's column arrived. The battlefield was a nightmare. Bodies lay scattered across the dry slopes, faces darkened and bloated by the relentless sun. Horses sprawled beside them, their saddles overturned, their reins tangled in the grass. In the center lay Custer, stripped, shot twice, once through the chest, once through the temple. His famous golden hair had been cut short before the campaign, denying even the myth its flourish. The burial was hasty. Graves were shallow, marked with rough wooden stakes. That night, an officer wrote quietly in his diary, "We must tell this carefully. The nation will not bear the truth." And so, the cover-up began. At Fort Lincoln, telegrams sent to Washington were vague and cautious. "A severe engagement has taken place." Custer's wife, Libby, clung to hope, refusing to believe the worst until confirmation came. Even in grief, she vowed that her husband's name would never be tarnished. But in the War Department, officials understood the danger. If the full story came out, if the public learned how arrogance and disobedience led to the slaughter, it could destroy reputations and careers. So they rewrote the ending. Custer, they declared, had died a martyr, a brave officer overwhelmed by impossible odds. The newspapers followed suit, printing the legend with stirring headlines and romantic illustrations. The truth that Custer had divided his command recklessly, ignored orders, and underestimated his enemy was quietly buried under the weight of national pride. The cover-up wasn't one lie. It was 100 small ones, omissions, adjustments, and silences woven into official reports. Witnesses were coached, testimonies edited. Reno's drunken panic became a strategic withdrawal. Benteen's fatal delay was reframed as calculated caution. Custer became a tragic hero. Behind every sanitized report was one purpose: to protect the Army's image. Yet not everyone was willing to stay silent. Letters and journals written years later spoke of confusion, fear, and fatal pride. Some officers hinted that orders had been ignored. Others admitted that key documents vanished from the record. When an inquiry finally convened in Chicago, crucial witnesses were missing. Reno's contradictions went unchallenged. Benteen's testimony was carefully edited. The conclusion was inevitable. No negligence, only fate. Meanwhile, Libby Custer became her husband's immortal advocate. Through books, lectures, and tireless promotion, she rebuilt his image as the gallant knight of the frontier. The War Department, eager to preserve the legend, encouraged her. Her voice turned disaster into mythology. Every retelling erased more of the fear, confusion, and blood that truly marked that day. By autumn of 1876, the public had accepted the official version. Congress praised Custer's valor. Monuments were proposed before the earth above the graves had even settled. The native victory, a rare, extraordinary act of unity and resistance, was reduced to a historical footnote. But truth has a way of surviving in whispers. Scouts and native witnesses spoke quietly of what they had seen of Custer ignoring warnings, of the camp's immense size, of soldiers breaking ranks and officers shouting in panic. Their testimonies, dismissed at the time, would later be proven accurate by archaeology and terrain analysis. Even the military archives bore the fingerprints of manipulation, missing dispatches, altered maps, blurred signatures. One officer wrote grimly, "We are ordered to maintain unity of account. Dissension would dishonor the service." Another added simply, "Better the fault die with the fallen." The cover-up was not born from a single conspiracy, but from pride, the unwillingness to admit that ambition, recklessness, and arrogance had doomed hundreds of men. A tale of noble sacrifice served the nation better than one of incompetence and deceit. And while Custer's name was carved into monuments and sung in parades, the native nations paid the price. Within a year, they were hunted down and forced to surrender. The Black Hills were seized. The victory that should have been remembered as their greatest triumph became the excuse for their destruction. Decades later, cracks began to form in the legend. Retired officers spoke freely at last. Historians uncovered letters that contradicted the official record. Archaeologists found cartridge shells scattered in retreat, not in defiant formation. The land itself, the ridges, the gullies, the bones beneath the soil, told a story the government had long tried to forget. This is not the Custer story you learned in school. This is Custer Cover-Up, the secret truth the U.S. Army buried after Little Bighorn. If you love real history, epic storytelling, and cinematic truth, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more forgotten tales of the Old West.